Hazards Consortium webinar entitled Understanding Storms and How They Impact Power Utility Fleet Movement. To kick things off, I have the pleasure of introducing Tom Moran, the Executive Director of the All Hazards Consortium. Tom?
Hi, thank you, Jackie. Let me welcome everyone and our panelists for this afternoon's educational webinar series. This webinar is really designed by the private sector to address public sector's questions about how do we know which storms are going to need fleet movement and which won't, which are not. So our focus today is to further educate both public and private sector operators and regulators on how storms and events, while similar at many times, can have different impacts that require varying levels and types of fleet movement across the region, as well as resource types that are needed to respond. For example, people, equipment, trucks and vehicles and so forth. The response and resourcing process is a complex process with many changing variables, as with any unpredictable weather-related events. The electric sector has been at this for many, many years and developed processes and procedures that address the needs both at a local, regional, and national level. Today's webinar will provide participants with a better understanding of how the electric sector prepares for and responds to various weather-related events and how the RMAGs, the Regional Mutual Assistance Groups, RMAGs, work together with their member companies, called local electric companies, if you will, when needed, to determine what resources and fleet movement types are required for each storm, and if it's large enough, if there's coordination needed across multiple states to expedite fleet movement through those states in order to get to the larger impacted area of states. To the average person, they may see something on television or the Weather Channel that really looks bad, but in reality ends up being a routine event for the local electric companies based on their experience, their processes, and their available resources on hand. So it's hard to tell by looking at the Weather Channel whether this is going to need this storm is going to impact such that it needs fleet movement on a regional level. Today's webinar will provide participants with an insider's view for some of the most experienced people in the electric sector business. So let me go to slide 2 real quick. The best way to describe this is to tell you a story. This is a real live event that happened here. In December 2013, a large ice storm impacted the central United States. The storm overwhelmed the available resources of the local electric companies in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma region, and the RMAGs were engaged to coordinate additional support from electric companies all up and down the East Coast. This coordination effort resulted in multiple fleets being dispatched from multiple companies from New York down to Florida. These fleets needed to move quickly through many states where the sun was shining, where we call a blue sky day, in order to get to the impacted states. Delays in the pass-through states can have big delay impacts on the impacted states as these things cascade going forward. The Regional Fleet Movement Coordination Initiative was born out of this event in December, and the companies and state advisors of the multi-state Fleet Response Working Group quickly moved to establish a series of regional conference calls that brought 18 states together, created awareness of the needs in the private sector, and provided the states with sensitive private sector fleet movement data for them to review, consider, and then provide guidance back to the incoming private sector fleets on the fastest way to get through their state's toll and weigh stations, roadways, copies of declarations, permits, all the things that can slow down the process. There was a series of information that was provided to the states. In order to help, the states needed to know basically 4 things: what was happening, how was their state involved, why was their state being requested to assist, and what information was needed from the state to provide to the private sector to support the effort. The support was really overwhelming for this event. As you can see on the screen, this slide shows the actual data that was shared by the private sector RMAGs with the states regarding the planned fleet movement that was used to support the response efforts for the December 6 storms. So if you look at this chart on the right, you'll see the requesting company states that were called, their companies in those states needed help, and all the way over on the left, you'll see the states from which companies replied, sent response from. It shows the departure time, the estimated time of arrival, whether the trucks coming were intra-state or interstate rated trucks, the number of full-time equivalents or people, and actually, as you move left to right, it shows you the impacted states in blue and the pass-through states in gray. So this information was rather sensitive, but it basically allowed everyone to know who's going to hit their state lines when and how they could support it. Once informed, state emergency management, transportation, state police, and other related agencies were able to provide guidance on how best to expedite fleet movement through their state in order to support these impacted states in the central part of the U.S. This process was later converted from a conference call process to an email process, which proved much more efficient and effective and was used multiple times with other winter storms in January and February 2014. Let me back up here. So our objective today is to educate everyone on the call and for future folks that look at this recording on how the weather events, while looking similar at times, can be very different when it comes to electric infrastructure impact, fleet movement, and the types of resources being moved. Basically, storms are not all the same. Some thunderstorms, hurricanes, snowstorms each have their own unique characteristics and dynamic impacts. The factors involved in determining intersection with other companies through RMAG associations, when and what resources are used, and the difference between company normal jurisdictional footprint and jurisdictions outside that footprint. So our desired outcome in the private sector is to provide public sector and other sectors within the private sector operational and regulatory leadership with a better understanding of regional multi-state fleet movement factors, the decision process, how things are triggered, and the probabilities of activation. In summary, this process does not replace or compete with any existing local utility relationship with their states, but enhances this utility efforts when the need for large multi-state coordination response efforts are needed as determined by the private sector utilities through their existing mutual aid groups. So with that, I wanted to introduce our host today, Mr. John Shaner. John has a long history in the electric sector and is currently a board member of the All Hazards Consortium, as well as the chair for the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group, which is sponsoring this webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host for today, Mr. John Shaner. John?
Thank you, Tom. I'm excited about this webinar. We have such many subject matter expert panelists on to participate in this, so I'm looking forward. Next slide. I want to give a brief description of what are regional mutual assistance groups. The regional mutual assistance groups were developed over many years. In fact, Southeastern Electrical Exchange is an association, but they have a committee that acts as a regional mutual assistance group that goes back to 1950s. And some of them go back to the early 2000s. And some of the reasons why they formed was for, like, they got together to prepare for Y2K, and a bunch of operators sitting around the table said, hey, we can help each other during events. Some of those events that have occurred over the years, to step back to September 11th in New York, Katrina, Ike, Isabel, Irene, ice storms, snowstorms, but also those smaller events that affect smaller geographic areas where you don't have to have a national event. You can have more of a regional, multi-state companies responding to support each other. As of last year, there are seven regional mutual assistance groups across North America, with members going into Canada, and you can see them listed here off to the right. They go from the Great Lakes, and a couple of those are associations. And it's very important that we differentiate between just an RMAG, a regional mutual assistance group, which is utilities that are working together to prepare and respond, versus an association that has many committees, and this is just one of the committee. Next slide. An example of an association with a committee is the Southeastern Electrical Exchange. For example, many of these utilities, all these utilities that are listed here, are part of that member company, and they encompass going from New York down to Florida, clear over to Texas. So it covers a lot of interaction, geographic area, a lot of different type of events that occur. Next slide. I would like to introduce the panelists at this time. And I'm going to ask them, we have a slide for each one of them, to talk more about who they are, their background, the years of service, and some about their company. But I'm truly honored to have the following people participate in today's call. From AEP, or American Electric Power, we have Jim Nowak. You can see by the bullets on the item, they're in many states, and they participate in 4 different regional mutual assistance groups. We have Tony Hurley from First Energy, again in multiple states, again in multiple RMEGs. And one of the things that we'll be discussing and that will be mentioned, there's a reason why they're members of multiple RMEGs. That's the overlapping effect that causes a faster interaction when the event occurs and more than one RMEG need to engage. So this is built into the process that has been developed over years. Tom Horn from Pepco Holdings Incorporated, or PHI, same sort of setup. Southeastern Electrical Exchange, Scott Smith. Now, Scott will talk about his background. He comes from the electric sector in Florida, but has gone to work for Southeastern Electrical Exchange that represents members across the eastern part of the U.S. And then Southern Company, Aaron Strickland, again, more in the southern part, multiple RMEGs. So these are our panels. On that note, I would like Jim Nowak, will you please give us a little bit of background on yourself, your company?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yes, my name is Jim Nowak, and I'm the Manager of Emergency Restoration Planning for AEP. As you can see from the slide, we serve approximately 5.3 million customers across 11 states. And if you look in the bottom left, we have our operating companies, and we have 7 of those that are located in various parts of the 11 states. I've been working for AEP for 37 years. The last decade, I've been dedicated to handling our corporate emergency response planning. So I've been working and had the pleasure of working with each one of our operating companies, as well as all the different utilities that are in the 4 regional mutual assistance groups that we are part of. In addition to that, I've participated in the EEI Mutual Assistance Emergency Preparedness Committee, a past co-chair, and we work then with all the regional mutual assistance groups on issues that are affecting us nationally, how we can do a better job. So it's constantly looking to improve, not to stay where we are. And as you look at AEP, you can see that based on our territory, we have approximately 200,000 square miles. Some of it is very rural. If you go down into the western part of Texas, we have customers that are roughly 2 customers per square mile. But if you come up to our largest city, Columbus, Ohio, we have a very urban area where we have a lot of networks, we have a lot of backups and loop feeds so that it goes from one extreme to the other. And unfortunately, because of our geographical footprint, we go all the way from the Great Lakes to the Gulf, which includes the ice events, tornadoes, hurricanes, and actually with the New Madrid fault line, we're involved in potential for earthquakes, as well as some wildfires in the Texas area. So unfortunately, we see a lot of it, and as we talk to with the rest of the panel, see that they also are exposed to a lot of similar activities. That's all I have, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Tony Hurley from First Energy, will you give us some of your background, please? Tony?
Tony, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay, let's go to the next. Tom Bourne. We'll get Tony back. Tom from PHI, will you give us some of your background, please?
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I guess a little bit of personal background. I'm in my 38th year of working for what's now Pepco Holdings. I am in the Atlantic City Electric, physically in the Atlantic City Electric operating company. My background is mostly in the substations area, in system protection and areas like that. I did not come out of the lines department. but since 2007, I've been doing full-time emergency management for PHI, which really includes plans and exercises, but also mutual assistance. I'm primary contact for PHI as far as mutual assistance goes. I have served as the incident management team leader. I've also been a former chairman of the Mid-Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group, which was merged last year into the North Atlantic RMAG, which John showed a couple of slides back, and also formerly a member of the EEI Mutual Assistance Executive Committee that Jim Nowak just talked about. As far as PHI, Pepco Holdings, Inc., we are 3 operating companies: Atlantic City Electric, Delmarva Power, and Pepco. Each operating company has a slightly different geography and customer base. Atlantic City Electric's more rural. It's the garden, part of the Garden State, I guess. As you get near Philly, it gets a little more urban. And then you'll see in Delmarva Power there in the yellow, Delmarva Power in the northern part of their service territory. It's very, very metropolitan and urban. But as you spread out south in their service territory, a lot of co-ops and municipals. That's why the service territory looks kind of dotted that way. And then over in Pepco, Pepco is the smallest footprint in PHI, but by far the most customers. In that small area of green that you see on the map there is about 750,000 of the just under 2 million electric and gas customers that PHI has. I think that's it, John.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Tony, did you join us again? Okay, Scott, would you give us a little background on Southeastern Electrical Exchange, please?
Yes, thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. Before joining the Southeastern Electric Exchange in 2011 as Assistant Director, I worked for Tampa Electric Company in Tampa, Florida for 25 plus years, served in a variety of different managerial roles, which included manager of system reliability, which had responsibility for emergency management coordination for energy delivery and mutual assistance coordination. Tampa Electric Company is and was a member of the Southeastern Electric Exchange, and I also, in representing Tampa Electric Company, I served as chairperson for SEE's Mutual Assistance Committee before leaving the organization. So I joined SEE in 2011 as Assistant Director, and we are, as John has mentioned, not necessarily a regional mutual assistance group because we are an investor-owned trade association. We're made up of over 50 different operating companies that aren't necessarily geographically confined to the Southeast, as you see in the slide. Our members serve customers in 22 states in the District of Columbia. They, again, are dues-paying members, and we have a variety of different working groups that are primarily focused on exchanging best practices in the areas of engineering and operations. And one of these key groups is our Mutual Assistance Committee, where our operating companies have company representatives that coordinate their work in that committee and represent their organizations. They rely on SEE when there is a time in requesting assistance. They activate the committee's joint mobilization process, whereby SEE facilitates a process that we've been using for many years in requesting resources and facilitating coordination of assistance, not only across our membership, but we also are a point of contact in working with other regional groups when there are needs outside of our region or where we're needing to gain assistance from outside the Southeastern Electric Exchange. That's it, John.
Thank you. Tony, did you come back yet?
Yeah, can you hear me, John?
Yeah, go back. Could you give us a brief background on yourself and your company, please?
Thanks, John. Yes, First Energy has 6 million customers, 6 states, and covers about 65,000 square miles. We have 10 operating companies. I'm Vice President of Operations for the Jersey operating company, Jersey Central Power and Light. I've been with First Energy Companies for 34 years, and 33 years of that was in Ohio. So I've been in those regions, and I've also worked in the other regions. First Energy, besides the mutual assistance organizations that the RMAGs were part of, we also provide a lot of mutual assistance to the adjacent states such as Michigan, Indiana, up north, New York. But we also go out of town, Florida, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, just a couple, when it comes to hurricanes. So we've got a lot of interaction with a lot of different organizations and utilities. First Energy's territory, if you look at that map, you see New Jersey. Tom Bourne talked about New Jersey. It's the most populated state per square mile. So when a hurricane impacts the state of New Jersey, it impacts a lot of customers. And then the way First Energy is positioned, you take a look at Toledo, Ohio, and part of Pennsylvania. We're right on Lake Erie. And that plays against us sometimes too, because what will happen is you'll get the warm air coming across the plains. It'll pick up moisture in the Great Lakes, and then we'll get walloped with a pretty good thunderstorm and derecho and high winds and all that. And then we also get our share of ice storms as well. So a little bit about our company and myself.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Aaron, would you give us a little background on Southern Company, please, and yourself?
Yeah, thanks, John. My name is Aaron Strickland. I'm Emergency Operations Director for Georgia Power. However, I represent Southern Company on a national level. At this time, I'm co-chair of EEI Mutual Assistance, and just working throughout the industry with all the different groups, members of Southeastern Electric Exchange, and also Texas Mutual Assistance. Southern Company, which I represent, we have about 5 million customers and serving 4 states, Alabama, Mississippi, Gulf, which is in Florida, and Georgia Power. We have about 120,000 square miles. I guess the big thing with us being where we are, we've got coastal territory on Georgia's coast and the Florida Gulf Coast. We face the hurricanes, tornadoes, ice. If any of you are following us this past year, the ice there, tornadoes, we have it all. So we end up in the Southern Company, we average about 20 to 30 what we consider major storms affecting our territory every year. So we've got a lot of experience in dealing with all the different types of disasters that can occur. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, panelists. Going into the next section of their presentation and the panelists, we're going to start talking about storm events. And while we'll speak to different types of weather events, we'd like to get a feel for what events have had some of the worst impact on your service territory while we talk to the upcoming slides. Now, what we did is we tried to select specific events and throw it to some of our subject matter experts on the panel, understanding that there's probably not a single company that on this panel or association that hasn't been affected by all these events. Tornadoes across the cold country, hurricanes come clear up into, like Ike has come clear up into Ohio. So we understand that. So what we want to do is the following slides will zero in on various storm types and help the audience and us in general better understand the different impacts of each of them and how sometimes some of them require multi-state fleet movement and others do not. So going to the next slide, what I would like is Tom Bourne. Tom, what I want you to focus on is the winter snowstorm. You know, what are the factors that cause this type of event to be a threat to the electric sector and affect the infrastructure?
Okay, John. Let me just tee this up a little bit by saying I'm not going to talk about ice storms because I know that Jim Nowak will talk about that a little later. And to us, I think it does present a different set of factors. So what I'm going to talk about is our experience with a snowstorm, you know, a major event, but snow related. And I'll also say that as I speak about our experience, I can say that the experiences of other companies could be very different. Now that these 3 mutual assistance groups have merged into what's now called the North Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group, I've had a lot of more chances to interact with companies in our northeast, in Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire, and opportunities in the last year that I haven't had before. And I can tell you that snow in the Northeast has a very different effect than snow in the Mid-Atlantic or south of us, I guess. They'll get snow forecasts for 12, 18 inches of snow up in Maine or over in Canada where we have members, and it's just part of normal everyday experience. So I think geography would be the first thing that I really hadn't considered before, but geography can have a big effect. The other thing with snowstorms, I think, is that the National Weather Service or your weather service providers, the meteorologist community has gotten very good, and they can forecast to a pretty high degree of accuracy impact of snowstorms. I look back to the end of 2010. I think it was early December of 2010. We got hit by what was called locally a snowmageddon or snowpocalypse. It was actually a double blizzard. And 4 to 5 days out, the National Weather Service had predicted it would be a major impact and all that. So snowstorms in general, I think there's a high degree of accuracy in the forecast. Now, however, having said that, the change in direction of the center of the storm, or the change in a degree or two of temperature can really make a big change in what you expect. So a storm that maybe you think is going to come right over top you and dump a lot of snow, it changes direction of a degree or two in direction, and you have much less impact. And sometimes you look at those snow bands and all that, and it only takes a little bit of change in the direction of a storm to have a major change in the impact. And also the temperature, the ambient temperature. Is the snow going to be a wet snow, or is the snow going to be a dry snow? A wet snow, much heavier, and a lot more moisture content to it, so it weighs more, and it's going to have a lot more profound effect on your infrastructure, whether it's cross arms and wire, or poles, or trees and tree branches. So I think that kind of sums it up. We certainly would have ample time to start speaking to each other in terms of within an RMAG or external to your RMAGs, to start to line up resources or talk about resource availability. Generally speaking, with a snowstorm, we're probably talking 3-4 days in advance.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Jim, kind of moving forward, we separated the winter snowstorm, and what we got from Tom was more of the heavier wet snow would have a effect on trees, which would affect our wires. When it comes to ice storms, it's a little different. Can you give us a brief summary of what you feel are the threats from those type of events, and are there secondary issues, and how does it affect the infrastructure? Thank you.
Yes, John. And ice events, they do have some of the similarities of a snow event, and you do look at them from the standpoint of they are predictable to a degree. And the difference between your typical ice and snow event is an ice tip is more a very small band where the temperature is within a range of probably 4 degrees. So if it gets a little warmer than that range, it tends to rain. If it gets below, then it's tending to be snow. So it's really a very hard prediction from the standpoint of knowing exactly where it's going to hit, but it is a fairly good opportunity, or through the meteorologist, to predict that one is coming. It's just whether it's going to shift a little north or shift a little south. Now, when we look at that, there's some things that we have to take into account. If there's foliage on the trees, then an ice event really can create more additional problems. That additional icing on the trees will cause them to break quicker, lean over. In addition to that, it's what was the temperature prior to that icing event. If you happen to have had some real warm weather, then the actual infrastructure as well as the trees are a little warmer, and it takes a little longer for the ice to really start forming on them. However, if it was significantly colder before, that adds additional problems, because then it does the ice, as it forms or falls onto the conductors or the equipment, will tend to melt a little before it freezes up. Now, we're also concerned about wind. You can have an ice event and you can have a quarter inch, a half an inch of ice, and if you have no wind, you're doing all right, and you probably can get through with minimal outages. But when you start getting up to a half an inch of ice or more, or half an inch ice with wind, you're going to have a lot different, and you've got to watch out for situations where you have a lot of wind in there. Then there's the one thing that John mentioned was, what happens 2 or 3 days down? If you have an ice event and it stays below freezing for 2 or 3 days, all the trees that are leaning over, they'll retain that ice, and then when they start thawing, they'll come back up. And a lot of times, if you put the conductors back up, get your system re-energized, you'll get second set of outages from the conductors, from the trees moving up back through the conductors and creating issues. It's really difficult to have trimmed all the trees and take those down to make sure that you can avoid that, but that is an issue that does happen. Another issue with the equipment, if you have down conductors and you have a half an inch to an inch of ice on it, a lot of times it's very difficult to get that conductor back up and use it, and you've got to look at stringing new conductor. You just can't clean off all that ice and get it ready to be reinstalled, so it brings another set of issues. And just one more thing that I'll talk about is the fact of the terrain. When you have ice, it doesn't matter if you have a four-wheel drive. It really doesn't matter what you have trying to get around, especially if you have some hills. So based on your geographical location and the terrain, you may have a real hard time trying to get from location to location. And based on that, that really also prompts you to pre-stage, because you know once the event hits that it's going to be very difficult for people to get to the location. I think that covers pretty much everything, John, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jim. We're watching the time here, so that's why we're kind of moving forward. As you saw, you got a wet snow, a lot of snow. Most likely you're going to have interaction with other utilities and possibly request resources, whereas you have a dry snow, maybe not. Ice storm, you heard Jim talk about half inch. You throw wind with it, it causes a major impact. He mentioned about the interaction with other utilities. You may stage people in advance, or possibly not, depending on the threat and the ifs, the factors. So kind of moving forward, Tony Hurley, ice storms, we know in advance if there's a threat, not sure how much or where. Snowstorms, same thing. Thunderstorms, we see this big picture with this big red across half the United States. Can you talk about what are the factors involved with thunderstorms? We had the ratio back in, I think, 2011, 2012, I forget what year, but can you talk a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, I can. Just verifying you can hear me, John?
Yes, we can.
All right, good. Yeah, you actually hit the nail on the head when you talked about just the sheer mass. That's one of the issues with a thunderstorm. When they come in, especially the ones we experience, come across the Midwest, and then they pick up moisture, and then it really impacts your area. But the issue is along that path, it's either impacted a lot of folks that you usually can count on for mutual assistance, and in many cases, it's on its way to impact many others that normally come to your aid. So, when you get a hurricane, of course, you can reach out and you can, maybe go 500 miles away of an area that you know is not going to be impacted and pull people in. But with a thunderstorm, it's more unpredictable. The other issue is that, some of the big issues is just the timing of the storm. Utility companies, have to watch that. For instance, if you get a thunderstorm that comes in at 10 o'clock at night, did you hold your staff so that they can address it? Did you call mutual assistance in and work them at night? And then whenever the storm intensifies, maybe early in the morning, those staff eventually have to go home and get earned rest. So timing is important. But another big factor that we've had to deal with, especially with an area that is heavily treed, is the fact that it's not unusual for a thunderstorm to actually be after several days of heavy rain, and then it gets humid, and then that's when you start getting the pop-up storms. The dynamics of the heavy rains is that you get 2 or 3 days of saturation where that ground is saturated, and you get a 50 or 60 mile an hour winds where normally that tree would stand. All of a sudden they start uprooting. So you can be prepared for a storm knowing that your system can ride through a 50 mile an hour wind, but then all of a sudden, because of the saturation, you've got a lot of trees down, which kind of leads into the next factor. Thunderstorms are one of those unusual events. When you get ice, you know you're going to get down wires and you're going to get poles that are snapped. Hurricanes, same thing. With a thunderstorm, you can get a thunderstorm that the characteristic is it just gets a lot of lightning on a lot of conductor, breaks the wire, but doesn't really do anything to your pole inventory. And then you can also get, damage out there where it takes over trees and then also does damage pole. Why is that important? Well, if I reach out to my partners at AEP and say, Jim, can you send some vehicles and some personnel over here? The first thing Jim's going to ask me is, what type of vehicles do you want me to send? Do you want me to send 3 bucket trucks with every digger, or do you want me just to send bucket trucks? And that's why we watch the path of a storm. It's not unusual for us to call a utility that's already been impacted to say, what kind of damage did you experience? So that when we get on those calls and we start asking for equipment, we're asking for the right equipment. We're even asking for the right personnel. If we reach out on that call and start asking for personnel, and we know that this thunderstorm is not going to damage our transmission system, the conductors that are on our towers, then we're not going to ask for transmission linemen. But if we reach out to somewhere and they say, this thunderstorm here, not only did it damage distribution, but it also damaged transmission infrastructure, then obviously we're going to go out there and we're going to ask for that type of a personnel that are trained to do transmission and the equipment, which kind of leads into the next, what kind of equipment are we going to need? So it's not just about bringing trucks, because, we talk about the different types of areas. We have areas that all the poles are along the road because of the fact that we're in more of a rural community, so a bucket truck will reach every one of those poles. But you go into one of the cities that we serve, 30 to 40% of those poles are located to the rear of the homes. So it's an issue that we may ask individuals that are responding to our company to pull in their backyard equipment that's capable of going through gates and still able to dig holes to the rear. And that all has to come with not only the coordination of the mutual assistance request, but also the transportation, because when we're bringing that equipment across, again, you're bringing that equipment and those vehicles across. So these are just some of the factors that we consider when we get into a thunderstorm type of situation.
Thank you very much, Tony. Aaron, Southern Company is right in the bullseye, as many other utilities, for everything. Far enough, then you get the hurricanes, but tornadoes. You've been impacted with some very big ones, and so far this year, up to the 26th of May, there was a 224 tornadoes accounted for in the U.S., and there was an additional 14 on the May 26th, which was just a few days ago. Can you kind of give us a brief overview how tornadoes are different? What are the factors? Do you have any opportunities to prepare for them other than the normal stand up, be prepared, and how mutual assistance may play in a tornado?
Okay, thanks, John. I think a few highlights or low notes about tornadoes. In all my experiences, tornadoes are probably some of the most devastating when you come to human lives and destruction of any storms that we've ever dealt with. But what we generally find is you will hear of reports that there are potential tornadoes. The problem you have with those is exactly where they are, and they're so damaging. One of my claim to fame, I guess you'd say, is in 2011 we had 30 tornadoes in Alabama, 15 in Georgia, 1 in Mississippi. Actually, during that day, I actually called off troop movement for several hours because we had so many tornadoes hitting that we did not know where they were. that it was impacting our workforce, that we were scared someone was going to get hurt. So pretty devastating from that. From the standpoint of moving troops around, generally tornadoes affect maybe a couple states. Generally, you don't see them doing like an ice storm or a windstorm where it may affect a whole region. But with tornadoes, for whatever reason, normally you're seeing 1, 2 states, such as what Norman, Oklahoma faced, and what we faced with the severe outbreak in 2011. So with that, we're primarily moving resources from blue sky states into these areas, which is quite common with the Norman, Oklahoma, with us in Alabama and Georgia, and we're moving them in 2 areas. Into these areas, what we find, of course, in the areas that's impacted, the roads are just completely covered up with debris, no road signs, people traveling in, so people from outside, it's very hard for them to figure out where they are and where they're going because of the road signs. And if the other things we found is if you're trying to move people in too early, which in 2011 we did get a good warning the day before from the National Weather Service and our own weather folks. They said, of course, it's pretty severe looking, but it's hard to move people in because, again, the threat of them driving and flying debris and trees and all just blowing everywhere. So that's a big thing that we find that affects us. Secondary hazards, of course, talk about the roads, no signs. Other things that we find afterwards, people driving in to help us. There's a lot of debris that's hanging in trees on power lines. It's still falling, can fall, and injure them or civilians out in the area. So other things, main threats to our infrastructure, obviously the wind, the blowing trees, blowing debris. And we've even seen in 2011, we had complete infrastructure that we have yet to find. We have one substation in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that was completely blown away, and we have yet to find any of the transformers or anything in that substation. So big threat there. Not only to us, losing it, but somewhere that's blowing, miles away from there. Other things that are unique about tornadoes, usually the destruction is a tight area. As I mentioned, generally it's not a widespread area. Of course, that's the norm. There are always, other things that can happen, but that's generally it. Other factors that are big for us is the interactions with RMAG. We don't have a lot of time to get help in because so many times it's quick. But when it does, we're asking for resources to move quickly. And generally, it's from a few states away. I mentioned the Norman, Oklahoma storm with the Oklahoma Gas and Electric. They primarily pull resources from just 1 or 2 states away. But again, that's 1 or 2 states away, but we need to move those resources quickly through DOT, way stations, and things like that. As far as the April tornadoes that we had, April 2011 for Southern Company, I mentioned those. We pull resources throughout the entire SCE and from the Northeast and from the Great Lakes area. So we pull from a large number of areas because of the widespread destruction that it brought. As I mentioned earlier, 30 tornadoes in Alabama, 15 in Georgia, and 1 in Mississippi. It's kind of a unique tornado event. But moving the resources, the big thing is it just depends on the number and the size of the tornadoes. That's a big thing there, and the amount of area impacted, and us having to make that call quickly about moving resources in safely, avoiding the high winds. So real quick, John, that's highlights on tornadoes.
Thank you, Aaron. Excellent. And Aaron brought up something that's on the mind of everybody on this panel is safety is a priority in all cases. We will not, under any circumstances, move resources into harm's way, as anybody in the public sector as part of their mutual systems will not do also. So it's no different in the private sector. Scott, with your experience many years in Florida with TECO, and your Southeastern Electrical Exchange, we thought it would be good to kind of talk briefly about hurricanes. What are the factors? It's kind of obvious. We have a lot of time to prepare. Could you give us some ideas of how we interact on the hurricanes and so forth?
Thank you, John. I will. And a lot of what's already been shared thus far, it just essentially gets accelerated and ramped up with the larger scale events. Just a little background. All of our electric companies, well, companies across the states, they subscribe to weather information service providers, or they have meteorologists on staff, and certainly other industries within the private sector and public sector have those same interests in tracking the weather. I'm sure companies along the Gulf of Mexico are tracking Tropical Storm Arthur potential development for this weekend or first the next. And so they're looking at weather. They're looking at weather 24/7 just because they're operating an electric grid. Most companies, when they are sensing, evaluating that they are under a threat of a major tropical storm or a hurricane, their engineering staff, they're attempting to evaluate based on wind speeds, potential for surge. They're estimating the customer outages that they might anticipate if they're hit by this event. They are formulating the number of full-time equivalents that they might need over and above their current staff. And they typically are making a decision, okay, do we need to activate our incident command system or their storm plan? Most companies, in my experience, they're going to make that hard decision, which means they're going to start incurring major expenses 3 days out, 72 hours out from expected landfall. And we all know that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty with tropical storms and hurricanes as far as where the final landfall is going to occur. In 2004 at Tampa, we were expecting a direct hit by Hurricane Charlie, and within 12 hours it had made landfall several miles south of Tampa, and the metro area was not impacted, and yet we had resources mobilized into Tampa where they really were not needed. But so companies are assessing and looking at what they might need, and at that point, if they determine they're needing assistance outside of their own capability, they are likely going to be initiating a request for help through their regional mutual assistance group, and that's no different than with SEE, where we would be contacted, and we will facilitate a conference call, a joint mobilization call, where utilities will have an opportunity to declare what number of resources they might need, and then those companies that are not impacted, they convey the resources that they have available to respond and when they would be in a position to mobilize. You've heard a number of companies on the call today talk about their coastal threats, and because of the degree of uncertainty, a lot of times companies are not able to mobilize, even though they don't think they're going to get hit. There's so much uncertainty that they cannot provide advanced resources, so they're holding until further storm information becomes available. And that forces a lot of companies to have to go multiple states away, which might require 2 or 3 days drive for the initial request for resources. And they're going to be considering pre-staging resources. And these companies, as they're coming through, oftentimes the requesting company, they're not going to know exactly how many people are coming, including support staff, but they know the number of full-time equivalents that they have requested for restoration work, and they exchange rosters between company to company, and they're working with the regional group and accounting for the resource needs that have been determined at that point. It's very often that there aren't enough resources available, and that's when the regional groups will work together, multi-states involved, where they're requesting assistance from outside the region that's impacted, because those companies are typically out of harm's way. So a lot of what's been said thus far, it again just gets ramped up for tropical storms and hurricanes. And running out of time here, John, but I think that's about it.
Thank you, Scott. All of you, excellent. The next slide, and as you can see, that's why we were talked about the RMAGs initiating the fleet movement call, because they're the ones that know when they're interacting, if resources, what type of resources, and we'll touch on that real quickly, but we are running out of time. The next slide is really a hot summer, cold summer weather threats. And remember, one threat doesn't occur just by itself. Many times during the summer you'll have thunderstorms, you could have a hurricane threat, and you could have hot weather and summer threats. And basically, for this slide, all I'm going to say is under some unusual situations, storm conditions could threaten the reliability of the grid. And we had a webinar on the grid, and we talked about this due to extreme load, emergency operations, and we have procedures to mitigate that threat. In many cases, what happens there, the utility gets engaged in maintaining the reliability in a regional area. It's usually multiple utilities through their independent system operator or regional transmission operator, and they become somewhat unavailable to help in other activities that could be going on across our nation. So that's the real purpose of this slide. Is we talked about weather events, but this is a weather event, but it has a different effect, and mutual assistance in this case would not normally be utilized. Go to the next slide. So going forward, knowing that we're running out of time, and so one of the things I wanted to ask Jim Nowak and Aaron Strickland, and I will start with Jim first, is what are the different types of utility fleet movement, and why are they important? Can you kind of give us a list of those and a thought process behind that, Jim?
Sure. Yeah, when we talk about the fleet movement, we do really look at more than what people think. They normally would think we're moving line mechanics. But when we're moving resources and we get on a mutual assistance call, that request can be line, it can be tree, the line could be transmission or distribution, it could be assessors, we have support groups that go with them. They may want us to bring up a command center. So there's trailers we may be moving, there's safety personnel, special equipment, we may be doing backyard machines. There's a variety. So it's not your typical line truck. I mean, it typically is line trucks, but there's other things associated with it. And then we look to our contractors, and contractors make up a large percentage of our resources that we get during mutual assistance. And they come in from a variety of places, and they bring their special equipment. But one of the contractors we use a lot are our logistics contractors that will set up staging sites. So you could get a semi-trailer that really doesn't have a logo on it from the standpoint of they're just a shipping vehicle, but inside of it is all the tent, the food, whatever is needed by the logistics group. So we do really want to look at that. Now, if we're moving resources within a state, you know, pretty much our plates and our relationship that we built within that state allow us to make a smooth movement of resources. And really the movement of resources where we tend to have the more coordination occurs when we go and move resources across multiple states. John, I think that might be enough on that part.
Thank you, Jim. Aaron, what I wanted to touch on, you know, Jim talked about the different types, but I know, you know, we have different levels of teams, and we go to, at one point, a self-contained team. Can you kind of give us a feel for what the teams could look like, and we're trying, and, you know, in your words, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, when you're looking at several things, Gil mentioned one thing as far as contractors. What you could see there as far as teams for them, it would just be teams of linemen with line trucks, buckets, things like that. You get to something like self-contained teams. It could be someone like Southern Company, AEP, Duke, pick one, where you have what we call totally self-contained. It has not only the line personnel, it can have logistics personnel with logistics type equipment, meaning feeding, housing, things like that. It could include the right-of-way, the forestry type teams. It could include every type of work team needed and requested by the host utility to totally come in, self-contained, take care of ourselves logistically, meaning feeding, housing, things like this, as well as working the different type work, whether it be engineering, whether it be cutting trees, whether it be transmission, distribution, at all levels. It could include anything and everything, really, in that totally self-contained team. So those teams traveling, it could, like I said, of course, the buckets, the derricks, things like that. But in addition to that, the catering, engineering trucks, damage assessment vehicles, just a little bit of everything you can have in there. So it could look very different than just a line team rolling down the road due to all the different types of specialized equipment.
Aaron, a real quick question on that. Let's take a self-contained team. Is it possible that different parts of that self-contained team, like catering or the tents, could that come from different directions to meet at one point? Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely, John. Good point. Yeah, it can. It can come from different directions, different times. In fact, we have, when you've got a self-contained team, you may have a management team, engineering team, catering team that's not only coming from different directions, but also at different times. They can be ahead of a team because you need to get in there and get that catering set up so that when the crews get in, that they have food, housing, all of that taken care of. So not just different locations, but different times.
Thank you. Tony, I know you have a hard stop, so I'm going to slide in. Can you give us like a summary? We've touched on this off and on, but can you get a summary of going from company to RMAG, initiating the fleet movement, et cetera?
Sure, John. Again, I'll just take our company. We've got 10 different companies, so if we're sitting in one of the operating companies, and no matter what the event is, if we feel we can handle it, then we handle it ourselves. If we feel that we can reach out to one of our sister First Energy companies to come over and assist, we'll do that as well. It's when we get a larger storm that impacts multiple regions that we realize that with the focus on restoration, we may need assistance from the outside. We'll initiate a call with the RMAGs. We'll put out notice that we want to have a conference call, as all members are permitted to do. Then a conference call is coordinated. In that call, all the different operating companies, even though we might have been the one that asked for it, all the operating companies can talk about their needs, their availability. It's just like a brokering. So, we'll turn around and say, we need 100 FTEs that can do distribution work. This is the type of equipment. And then someone will step up and say, yes, we can provide that. And then there's that bartering that goes back and forth because maybe someone closer can provide those resources. So the fact is they would be able to respond much quicker. And then once that is decided, then that is put into play. And then it's when it becomes larger where you get a storm where the RMAG is overwhelmed, that it's obvious that there's a lot of different operating companies from different groups that are going to be asking for assistance, that we're going to be going across maybe 2 or 3 states, that the RMAG organization will then start this process, this fleet movement process. Well, they'll go ahead and start coordinating and notifying the states that, look, because of the state of emergency, there's going to be some fleet movement. Your assistance is beneficial in these. And again, somebody who's experienced at doing this, I've had some that have been very seamless, where you just basically are told, you're all clear to get to Florida. Just get down there. All the states are cooperating well, and we've all had to deal with situations where maybe there was some obstacles out there and it delayed the response. But because of the efforts of this organization, I think that is becoming more and more rare. So I applaud that. And then it also talks about, even the getting back. We keep talking about responding, but we also have to remember that it's also about getting everybody back too, because certainly the states, this organization does a very nice job of letting people know, hey, we've got 200 of our members over in New York State. We're going to have to bring them to their home bases in these areas, and then the states then step up and cooperate with that so we can get those individuals back pretty seamlessly as well. And again, one thing we didn't talk about is that crossing the border too. Again, with the efforts of this organization, working with U.S. Customs, quite frankly, last year there was some movement, or maybe it was earlier this year, some movement where Canadian companies were able to come over and respond. And quite frankly, I think it's the most seamless response across the border I've ever had the experience of being involved with. So my hats off to the organization.
Thank you, Tony, for bringing up those items. Getting resources back to where they came from, and also the border crossing, and the other items. Hey, Scott, one of the things we kind of want to talk about is, you've experienced this support of the states, and the states have always supported the public sector, both local, state, and federal. They have done everything possible to support private sector in the movement during emergencies. But you got this firsthand. You want to kind of talk to that a little bit about your experience?
Yes, John. Earlier this year, we had a winter ice storm event, and it required multi-state process. And through you and Tom, there was emails that were sent out to the states with a mass distribution list. And the states were great in providing timely responses. They were providing the Southeastern Electric Exchange emergency declarations right off the press, sometimes quicker than the utilities that were responding were able to secure it. The regional groups, SCE included, we would basically distribute the declarations and all other pertinent mobilization information out to our companies that are responding. They very much like to have that before they mobilize, but often they're leaving before the event actually occurs. And so their travel teams are maintaining connection through smartphones and other messaging, and they will share information on fuel, way stations, road closures, getting declarations out in the hands of their traveling crews, and they'll share that information real time so that we can be as safe and as efficient as possible in moving through states and across state lines into adjacent states, getting to their final destination. So the email process that was activated earlier this year and the state response was excellent and provided very valuable information to the utility crews that were moving in response and as they return home after the event was over.
Thank you, Scott. Tom, kind of moving forward, and we are coming to the last few slides, so for those on the phone, we're running over a little bit, so I do apologize for that. Tom, we talk about what regional information we share that is shared from the private sector and to the states to help this process. You heard Tom Moran talking earlier about this this call is supposed to enhance from a regional perspective what goes on within the state, but this doesn't supersede or exclude what goes on within the private sector and the state. Can you kind of talk about the information we share?
Sure, John. And let me just say that for this, maybe I could take an example of PHI sending resources to Georgia Power. So Tom from PHI is going to assist Aaron Strickland and Georgia Power. Within the RMAGs, within the utilities, we need to talk about very detailed stuff. If Tom's sending 50 people, then Aaron needs to know who are those 50 people, because they're going to be on his property doing work for Southern, and ultimately they need to get paid. So it tends to get very detailed. But for the fleet movement part of this and to facilitate, easy travel from point A to point B, I think what we would provide would be there are 50 resources and they're in 30 different vehicles, and these are the types of vehicles. They're going to be leaving from Atlantic City Electric and Delmarva Power and Pepco at these certain times, and expected to arrive on Georgia Power's property at these various points at certain times. And so that's the high level, because that's the part that's needed to facilitate the actual movement from the private side. I think from the public side, we would like to see, well, it's the stuff you have up on the slide, John. Are there declarations in the pass-through states or the receiving states? So if we have to leave and travel through Delaware and Maryland and North Carolina and South Carolina before we get to Georgia, what's the status of the roads in the states in the pass-through states and in Georgia. So are there declarations? Are there specific waivers involved in fuel permits or tolls? Are there roads that are off limits to us? Are there roads that have been blocked off? Do we have to stop for tolls? What's the process for passing through the tolls? Do we go ahead, or do we go through a certain booth and things like that? And I think that's as specific as we would need to get. And then, like your last bullet says, any relevant state-specific information. We might not know from any specific state if there's a piece of information that needs to be talked about or passed through.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent, and thank you, all the panelists. Before I hand this back over to Tom Moran from the All Hazards Consortium, one of the things that the All Hazards Fleet Working Group is working on is short, mid, and long-term solutions to these problems. You hear the word decorations, you hear the word way stations, toll roads all the time. What we're looking for is we have to be safe, we want to be legal, and we want to pay our dues. We're learning a lot through discussing with the public and private sector these choke points when we move fleet and what the issues are. We're learning from each other what options we have to move these fleets easier without always having to run to possibly the public sector for the solution. We want to get to the point where a gray sky day is no different than a catastrophic day. It's just more of what we do. So I'm very excited that these people had time to take this time to speak to us, and I appreciate that. And on that note, I will hand over to Tom Moran.
Great. Great. Thank you, John, and thanks to our panelists for today's call. Great information. We are recording this, and we'll make this available. On your screen, you should see some online resources if you'd like to learn more about this working group, some of the webinars it's already done regarding the power sector, electrical grid, and so forth. There's a number of websites up there that you can learn more about these types of things. Education is a central part of the Fleet Working Group, and a lot of energy has gone into that to help people understand, both public and private, understand the drivers behind this, what are the sector choke points, and how can we work together with states and operators to accomplish this legally and safe and so forth. If you have questions, the screen can provide you a number of touch points from websites to emails. I will point you to the middle of the screen. It says News and Alerts. If you'd like to stay in touch with this group and its activities and alerts and so forth, there's no charge. Sign up for that free subscription service there, and they push information out through that website. So with that, I want to thank again our panelists, and John, thanks for hosting this. Thank you all for attending. We hope this information was helpful, and we hope everybody has a great day. Thank you for attending, and this will conclude our webinar.